Their smirks hit me like an invisible slap, a reminder of my place in their eyes. Weak, worthless, every number I calculated, every contingency I planned, was now just a punchline in a room filled with cold fluorescent light. The reports were distorted, my words twisted, and suspicious eyes were fixed on me, daring me to prove myself. I felt the anger not flare, but solidify it, froze into something sharp as steel, heavy with purpose. Every detail, every move, became clearer than ever before, their every mistake etched into my memory. And in that quiet moment the question burned: how do you prove your worth when everyone is determined to humiliate you? Silence fell, but I was ready for my next move, cold and precise. I am Sergeant First Class Arthur Bishop, a U.S. Army logistics specialist. I'm the guy who rarely sees the front line but is always responsible for making sure everything behind it runs smoothly. Every brigade, every training exercise, every operation if the supply chain breaks. The consequences fall on my shoulders. I don't seek the noise or the glory, but I understand the value of every small detail on a battlefield map. Today, the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC, was crammed. The dry air of the California desert seeped through the windows, mixing with the smell of hot plastic from the monitors and maps. The cold fluorescent light beat down, making every face in the room a more stressed version of itself. 0 hour for Operation Desert Fury was approaching. In the center of the room, First Lieutenant Ryder Stone, confident to the point of arrogance, was presenting his plan. Steel Talon, a blitzkrieg-style assault, using his scout platoon's mobility to punch through OPFOR's lines and seize key objectives before the enemy could react. People nodded, smiled, approved. I remained silent, watching every detail he was overlooking. When my hand went up, the room fell silent. I picked up a laser pointer and aimed it at a thin red line on the map. The main supply route. The MSR. Your plan is impressive, Lieutenant, I said, my voice even. But this MSR runs through Coyote Pass. It's a natural bottleneck. Terrain data shows it's a perfect ambush point. If OPFOR blows the bridge there, your platoon will be completely cut off in 24 hours. No fuel, no water. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Ryder Stone spun around, and I saw that familiar smirk. He looked at me as if I were an insect that had just crawled onto his clean map, the smirk spreading across his face as his voice boomed through the room. Your job, Sergeant, is to count beans and bullets, not to draw up strategy. Go finish your Excel spreadsheets. Leave the war to the trigger pullers. A few chuckles echoed in the room. The anger in me didn't flare. It settled into a block of ice in my chest. I looked him straight in the eye and said nothing. Silence can be louder than any retort. Colonel Carver broke the silence. Noted, Sergeant Bishop. Then he turned to Stone. Lieutenant, proceed with the plan. I sat down, saying nothing. But in my mind, every route, every option, every risk was being filed away. I was angry, but it was a cold anger. This wasn't the time to fight back with words. This was the time to prepare for the next move. I would prove my point, not with shouts or arguments, but with action. I returned to my office, a makeshift room set up right behind the TOC, filled with filing crates and the low hum of servers. 4 plywood walls, the smell of old paper and desert dust, seeping through every crack. On my desk, amid a mess of paperwork, was a single black and white photograph. My father, a warrant officer in the Quartermaster Corps, taken during his final year of service. His words had been drilled into me since I was a kid. Arthur, remember this. A round hits its target not just because the shooter is good, but because someone did the math to get that round into the right hands at the right time. Those words were my guiding principle. They saw me as a bookkeeper, but behind the numbers I saw the roads. They thought I just counted bullets. But I saw the entire supply chain, the lifeblood of an army. I opened my laptop and launched a piece of software few in the brigade even knew existed. Logisim V, a military logistics simulator I'd spent hundreds of hours with. In there, I wasn't an anonymous sergeant. I was a player on a chessboard that spanned hundreds of miles. I dissected every campaign, from the frozen deaths of the German army at Stalingrad to the lightning advance of Desert Storm. I sat there, analyzing operations based on 1,000 variables: terrain, weather, fuel consumption, even troop morale. I entered the parameters of Steel Talon into the system. The result came back in minutes, just as I'd predicted. A red line on a graph plummeted, showing Stone's combat effectiveness dropping to 0 after just 36 hours. Failure was a certainty. The system even flagged Coyote Pass as a fatal funnel. I had no intention of showing this report to Colonel Carver. He had already made his decision. Protesting now would only make me look like a sore loser. Instead, I started making my own moves. I opened a new file and named it Operation Phantom Supply. I pulled out old geological surveys of the area, documents the younger officers skimmed over as outdated. Inside, I found what I needed: gold prospectors' trails from the 19th century, routes that didn't exist on modern military maps. They were treacherous, but they were a way out. I marked potential locations for underground water sources and caves that could serve as temporary supply caches. This was my own plan, a contingency for Ryder Stone's arrogance. He could be the brigade's sharp claws, but I would be the brain that kept those claws from cutting himself. He was playing checkers, making aggressive moves across the board. I was playing chess, thinking several moves ahead, quietly positioning my pieces for a game he didn't even know we were playing. My war had no gunfire, but it had begun, and I would not lose. No one had asked me to do this. No one needed to know, but I knew. And I never trust a plan built on an arrogant smile at a briefing. The exercise began. For the first 24 hours, the TOC's radio traffic was flooded with Ryder Stone's excited voice. His scout platoon moved like a ghost through the desert, seizing one objective after another. Objective Alpha is secure. Opfer didn't know what hit him. Moving on Objective Bravo. No resistance. In the TOC, officers were clapping each other on the back. Steel Talon was a resounding success. Occasionally, I'd catch Stone's eye on the comms screen, glancing toward the logistics section with a look of pure smugness. He didn't have to say it, but I knew what he was thinking. See, paper pusher? This is how real soldiers fight. I said nothing. I just quietly cross-referenced his fuel consumption reports with my projections. They were a near-perfect match. He was burning fuel faster than he thought, just as I had calculated. The clock was ticking. On the morning of the second day, at 0600 hours sharp, a simulated explosion echoed, loud enough to shake the entire camp. A few minutes later, the drone feed filled the main screen in the TOC. A plume of black smoke rose from Coyote Pass. The bridge was nothing but a pile of rubble. The MSR, the supply lifeblood, was completely severed. In the TOC, the murmurs died into a tense silence. The numbers flashed on screen. 12 hours of fuel remaining. 12 hours of water. Then, Stone's forces were stranded deep in enemy territory, dozens of miles from the rear. Stone's voice roared over the radio, the confidence gone, replaced by anger and a hint of panic he was trying to hide. What the hell is going on with logistics? Why wasn't this stuff pushed up sooner? This is on you people. I almost laughed. The blame game, the classic response of a man who can never admit he was wrong. We need a new supply route. Now, Stone yelled. A staff officer pointed to an alternate route on the map. We could try to go around the Whispering Bones Ridge, but the terrain is extremely rough. I don't care, Stone cut him off. Just do it. Don't leave us out here to dry. I sat still at my station, watching the chaos begin to spread. They were trying to fight a fire with a half-baked plan, a knee-jerk reaction born of fear. Meanwhile, on my laptop screen, Operation Phantom Supply remained, calm and orderly. The old trails, the secret caches, everything was ready. They didn't need me yet. But they would. The sand in Ryder Stone's hourglass was running out fast. The panic in the TOC was like a wildfire. It started with a single spark and quickly spread, burning away all rational thought. Their half-baked plan to resupply stone over the Whispering Bones Ridge failed miserably. 2 trucks got bogged down in the sand. Another was ruled hit by an ambush. Their efforts only made the situation worse. During all this, I kept to my work, calculating, analyzing, and waiting. But I never expected the next threat to come not from Stone's incompetence, but from within my own unit. Specialist Donovan Finch. A sharp young soldier, but always restless, always ambitious. I'd mentored him, showed him the ropes, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. Finch looked at officers like Stone with admiration, craving their spotlight. He saw me as a boring old boss, an obstacle on his path to promotion, and he chose this moment to make his move. In the heat of the crisis, Colonel Carver demanded an emergency report on our total remaining fuel reserves. I tasked Finch with double-checking the final figures before I submitted it. 5 minutes later, I saw Finch walking out of Stone's tent. I didn't think much of it at the time, but half an hour later, when Colonel Carver summoned me to a private meeting, I knew something was wrong. "Sergeant Bishop," he said, his voice cold, pointing to a report on his desk. "This report shows our fuel inventory is 30% lower than what you reported this morning. How do you explain that?" I was speechless. I looked at the report. My signature was there, clumsily forged, and the numbers had been altered. It was a gross misrepresentation, implying that I had miscalculated from the start. That the shortage Stone's platoon was facing was partly my fault due to negligence. "Sir, this isn't my report. There's been a mistake." "A mistake?" Carver's brow furrowed. Specialist Finch confirmed these numbers. He said you ordered him to amend it at the last minute. Stone also just reported that you've been uncooperative from the beginning. "So what is it, Sergeant?" The room fell silent, but every eye was on me. No longer with quiet doubt, but with open judgment. Across the room, Ryder Stone stood with his arms crossed, the corner of his mouth turned up in a triumphant smirk. The knife was in, not 1, but 2. Finch had betrayed me to get in good with Stone, and Stone had used that lie to make me the scapegoat for his own catastrophic failure. I had nothing left to say. Any explanation now would sound like a pathetic excuse. I was completely isolated, not by fences or barbed wire, but by suspicion and lies. I walked back to my container, feeling the weight of every stare on my back. They no longer saw me as a soldier, but as a failure. But they didn't know one thing. Isolation is sometimes the best condition for a strategist to work. No more distractions. No one paying attention. Now, it was just me and Operation Phantom Supply, and I was about to show them what a failure can do when backed into a corner. Night fell on Fort Irwin. The cold seeped through every crack, sharp as a knife. But the chill outside was nothing compared to the ice in the TOC. Things had gone from bad to worse, to catastrophic. OPFOR, the opposing force in the exercise, were not fools. They saw our chaos, our desperate attempts at resupply, and they made their move. Reports flooded in, each one worse than the last. TOC. This is Eagle Eye. OPFOR is tightening the noose around Steel Talon's position. Estimate 2 mechanized infantry companies. Steel Talon reports ammo is below 20%. Water is critical. All approaches to Steel Talon are under enemy fire. All rescue attempts have failed. Steel Talon was no longer a plan. It was a death trap. And Stone's platoon was the bait. On the main screen, their position was a lonely blue dot, surrounded by a sea of red dots that were closing in. It was only a matter of time. The arrogance was long gone from Ryder Stone's face. Now, his voice over the radio was just a strained plea of exhaustion and desperation. "TOC, we need support. We can't hold out much longer." No one answered. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Every option had been proposed and dismissed. Air support? A sandstorm was moving in. Artillery? The range was too close. The risk of friendly fire was too high. A breakout? That was suicide. The silence in the TOC was heavy as lead. The ticking of the digital clock on the wall seemed to be counting down to humiliation. Just then, Colonel Carver stood up. He didn't yell. His voice was low and even, but the disappointment in it was worse than any roar. He slammed his hand on the table. Not hard, but enough to make everyone flinch. 2 hours, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. I'm giving you all 2 hours to find a solution. Any solution. If nothing changes in 2 hours, I am calling an end to this exercise. He paused, letting his words sink in. And it will go down as the most catastrophic failure in this brigade's history. Am I clear? No one dared to speak. 2 hours. 120 minutes. To salvage the honor of an entire brigade and the simulated lives of a platoon. Desperation had peaked. They were out of ideas. That's when I knew my moment had come. I stood up from the corner where I had been sitting in silence, observing for hours. Every eye turned to me. They expected nothing from the disgraced logistics sergeant. They were wrong. I stepped forward, walking directly to the large tactical map that displayed the impending disaster. My movement sent a ripple through the room's desperate stillness. A few officers frowned, probably thinking I was about to apologize. Ryder Stone, on the comm screen, just stared at me with empty eyes. I didn't look at anyone. I looked only at the map. Colonel, I began, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence. There is a way. All attention was on me. Colonel Carver crossed his arms, his eyes narrowed. Talk, Sergeant. I picked up the laser pointer, but I didn't aim it at roads or military units. I pointed it at the empty spaces on the map. The areas everyone else had dismissed as useless. The enemy is focused on what they can see, I explained. They're watching the main roads, the valleys, the places military textbooks teach us to watch. But they're not looking at what they can't see. I traced a series of faint trails with the laser. These are gold prospectors' trails from the 19th century. They're not on modern military maps, but they're still there. They're wide enough for a light tactical vehicle if the driver is good enough. Then I pointed to a few other spots. And here, according to old geological surveys, are locations of underground springs and a few small caves. We can set up secret supply drops right under the enemy's nose, and they'll never know. The plan began to take shape before their eyes. A plan based not on force, but on stealth and information they had ignored. My plan, Operation Phantom Supply, I continued. We'll use 3 teams, each with 2 Humvees disguised to look like civilian vehicles. They will move at night, lights out, using NVGs, along these trails. Simultaneously, we will create a diversion to the west, move a few tanks out there, and fire off some illumination rounds to draw all of OPFOR's attention in that direction. The silence now was not of despair, but of astonishment. The plan was too audacious, too unconventional. A ghost convoy? Are you kidding me? Stone's voice came weakly over the radio. That's suicide. Sitting there and waiting is suicide. I shot back, my voice ice cold. Showing my edge for the first time, I looked directly at Colonel Carver. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the map, at the trails, at the cold, hard logic of the plan. He could see the preparation, the meticulous calculation behind the apparent madness. Finally, he looked up, his expression no longer skeptical. Instead, there was a glimmer of hope. Sergeant Bishop, he said forcefully, I don't care if this plan is in any textbook. I care if it works. He pointed at me. I'm giving you full command of this operation. Radio, vehicles, personnel, anything you need. You have 90 minutes. Make it happen. It wasn't just an order. It was a gamble. And the entire brigade was betting on the paper pusher. I didn't waste a second. The moment Colonel Carver gave the order, I turned my corner of the TOC into a miniature command center. I didn't need a rifle or body armor. My weapons were my ruggedized tablet, a radio, and the detailed maps I had prepared beforehand. I need 3 teams, 2 of the best drivers you have in each, I said into the radio, my voice crisp and clear. Men who can drive in the dark like they're taking a Sunday stroll. I need the artillery battery to create a light show at grid coordinates Zulu 7 at 01000 hours. Fire some illumination rounds, move some tanks around to make noise. Make it look convincing. Air recon. I need thermal updates on OP4 every 5 minutes. I want to know every move they make. The orders were given calmly, precisely, without a hint of hesitation. The soldiers, from officers to privates, were surprised at first, but then they recognized the absolute confidence in my voice. They got to work. At 0030 hours, 6 camouflaged Humvees, loaded with water, fuel, and ammunition, rolled silently into the desert. They didn't move in a convoy but split up, each one a ghost gliding through the night. I tracked them as small green dots on my tablet, coordinating them like a chess master moving his pieces. Phantom 1, take the left fork at the next rock formation. OP4 patrol 500 meters to your east. Phantom 2, maintain speed. You're on schedule. At 0100 hours sharp, the sky to the west lit up. The rumble of tank engines and a few simulated explosions followed. Just as predicted, the red dots on my map began to shift in that direction like moths to a flame. The diversion was working. Meanwhile, my ghost convoy had navigated the old trails, approaching Stone's position from the rear, a direction Upfer never thought to cover. Over the radio I heard Stone's voice, this time filled with disbelief. TOC. I see them. My God, I see them. They're here. The resupply was silent and swift. 15 minutes later, Stone's platoon had everything they needed. With fresh resources, they didn't just hold their ground. They counterattacked. They punched through the encirclement at the very weak point Opfer had created by focusing on the diversion. The operation was an unimaginable success. Opfer was defeated not by firepower, but by a symphony conducted in silence by a man they and we had underestimated. As dawn broke and victory was confirmed, cheers erupted in the TOC. But amidst the celebration, something else was happening. Specialist Finch, his face pale and trembling, walked up to Colonel Carver's desk. He couldn't take it anymore. The guilt and the sheer awe of what Bishop had accomplished had broken him. "Sir," he stammered, I have a confession to make. About the fuel report. About Sergeant Bishop." The truth was finally coming to light, not because I had forced it, but because of its own immense weight. The after-action review was held in an unusually quiet room. The tension was gone, as was the arrogance. There was only anticipation. Colonel Carver stood before the entire brigade. He didn't start with numbers or graphs. He started with a story. For days, he said, his voice deep and resonant, we focused on firepower, on speed, on flashy plans on a screen. We almost paid for it with a humiliating defeat. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces until it rested on me. But it was Sergeant First Class Arthur Bishop, a logistics NCO, a man whose work is usually done in silence, who reminded us all of the most fundamental truth. An army marches on its stomach. With intellect, meticulous preparation, and quiet courage, he saved this exercise and taught us all an invaluable lesson. He looked directly at me. "Sergeant, on your feet." I stood. The entire room turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw no doubt or scorn in their eyes. Instead, there was respect. Then one person started clapping, then another, and soon the room was filled with applause. Specialist Finch received a heavy disciplinary action, but his greatest punishment was likely the contempt from the very people he had tried to impress. After the meeting, Ryder Stone found me. He was no longer the arrogant hotshot Stone. His confidence was shattered, leaving only a young soldier who had been forced to confront his own fallibility. He stood before me, silent for a long moment, then held out his hand. "I was wrong, Bishop," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was wrong about everything. Thank you for saving our asses." I shook his hand. "Just doing my job, Lieutenant." A week later, I received two things. The first was the Army Commendation Medal, pinned on my chest by Colonel Carver himself. The second, more significant, was a transfer order. I was no longer in that cramped container. I was being reassigned to the S3 Plans and Operations, working directly for the Colonel. That evening, I went back to my quarters. I placed the new medal right next to the old black and white photo of my father. I looked at his eyes in the picture and felt as if he were nodding. They called me a paper pusher. Maybe I am, but they forgot a basic rule of chess. Sometimes it's not the king or the queen, but a quiet pawn, advancing one steady step at a time, that decides the entire game. And this game I had won.